Hey everybody, I'm Derek. Welcome back to my shop. Today we're doing a top 3 reasons why you should start welding with a flux core welder. So I just want to let you guys know you're getting this from a guy who's never been paid to make a single weld other than a few things I've sold that I've welded up, as well as a guy who's never taken a welding class, self-taught. I'm really not even that great of a welder, but I have been doing it for long enough that I feel like that I can offer a little bit of advice. And so of that advice comes my first reason why I think you should consider picking up a flux core welder as your first welder to learn how to weld with, is that it is easy to use. Flux core welders, in my opinion, are easy to learn to use. So just to bring up stick welding or SMA really quick, there's a big learning curve there, and that's actually why a lot of people suggest that you should learn to stick weld before learning the other processes. They say that once you learn how to stick weld really well, then all the other processes become really easy. And I kind of see their point with that, but I also feel like that stick welding can be so frustrating when you first start that you might just get discouraged and want to stop doing it. And so, in my opinion, starting with something like flux core that's easy to use, you can get decent looking welds out of, is better because you probably won't get discouraged as easily. Even if your welds are ugly, you'll have decent strength, a decent holding weld with some strength behind it because of the penetration ability that flux core welders have. And with stick, you might get a whole weld puddle down and you realize that the two pieces never really fuse together. I just find that I have a really good success, even on really ugly looking welds, with pretty good metal fusion compared to stick welding. Flux core welders, I think, just bring less frustration, especially to start with. There's less waste with them compared to like a stick welder. You're throwing away a lot of burnt rods because your settings weren't right, or you just knocked off a bunch of flux. It can just get really frustrating, and again, you're wasting a lot of material like with flux core. So if you're on a budget, you probably aren't going to be wanting to throw half your tube of welding rods away trying to learn how to do the welding process. So even if your welds don't really look that great, they're probably going to hold okay, especially compared to ugly stick welds, at least in my experience. And just overall less frustration and just simply easier to use. And that brings me to my second reason why I think you should learn flux core welding before other processes, and that is because it has a wide range of uses. So you can actually weld pretty thick metal with it and pretty thin metal. Flux core is a really hot welding process, similar to stick, but much more so than like TIG or MIG, and you can weld and fuse really thick pieces of metal together even on a 110 volt stick welder on a 110 volt flux core welder, because the weld is so hot. So if you're wanting to maybe put up a small building in your backyard or something, doing farm ranch work, whatever, you'll probably get a lot wider range of uses out of a flux core welder versus like a stick welder or something else. And then also, with that being said, because it's a really thin wire feed machine, you can weld like square tubing or round tubing and sheet metal pretty easily. You can't go too terribly thin. The limit on both of my machines is at 18 gauge, and that's as far as running beads go. Now you can do some spot welding with flux core, even with some thinner material like 20, 22, 24 gauge material. Flux core is not really the best welding process for that. I've got a few videos on that if you would like to go search through my channel and check them out. Welding really thin sheet metal with a flux core welder. I weld a lot of 14 gauge, 16 gauge material, square tubing, stuff like that with the things that I do in my shop and the things that I like to build. So you can go pretty thick because of its penetration ability and have pretty good quality welds. And then, like I said, also you can weld pretty thin stuff, especially compared to a stick welder. You can't really weld very thin material with a stick welder. I pretty much can't weld anything thinner than 1/8 inch thick very well. With a stick welder, it just gets really difficult beyond that point for me to not burn holes through and to get a nice weld and bead profile. So overall, flux core welders have a pretty good wide range of uses compared to the other processes, in my opinion. So my final reason on why I think you should consider picking up a flux core welder is because of the cost. You can buy an inverter flux core welder, which is what you'd want to buy because you get better looking welds out of an inverter than a straight transformer or AC flux core welder. So you can pick one up for between $150 and $200. So then you go out and buy yourself a cheap wire brush if you don't have them, a cheap pair of welding gloves, and an inexpensive auto darkening welding helmet. And you can be in $220, $230, at most $250. And that's pretty cheap considering how much it can cost to get into welding. And you'll be ready to go. Like I said, quality welds, at least in terms of strength. Maybe they don't look that nice, but that all comes with time and practice. And also, you're not buying a gas bottle, which can cost you a whole lot of money. Like if you buy one from a retail store like Tractor Supply, I think for the size that I have, they charge you like $300 or $400 for a brand new bottle. Something absolutely ridiculous. I bought mine used from my neighbor with another bottle, an oxygen bottle, and it cost me $150. But then I kind of had some problems with my local welding supplier, a guy I know that works for him trying to give me some help. Anyway, that's a long story and it's irrelevant to this, so we're going to stay away from it. And then you got to buy a regulator. I picked one up from Harbor Freight for like $70. That's a cheap one, although I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's a pretty good one. But and then, not to mention, to get into like MIG welding, your upfront welder, just the cost from the machine is going to cost a lot more than just for the flux core. So to do really any of the gas shielding processes, you're probably going to start easily bottom end $500 to get into it. So almost half the cost to get into flux core. Now with that being said, you do need to know that the flux core welding wire does cost more per roll than the solid welding wire for gas shielded welding. So that is something to consider, but just buying, one roll, especially if you buy like a 2-pound roll from Harbor Freight, which isn't the greatest quality wire, you're still picking up that 2-pound roll is still going to last you for quite a while. It doesn't go super fast, depending on how much you're doing, obviously. Also, just compared to like a stick welder, you can get cheap stick welders for around the same price, but then there's still all that frustration that goes with it. So overall, I think that for the cost and the ease of use, as well as the versatility of the machines, it would be a good idea to get into a flux core welder. Alright guys, go to the comments below and let me know if you have any other thing to add to this list, any other reason why you think that a flux core welder is a good place to start. Let me know if you have a problem with anything that I said. Obviously, this is going to come down to your opinion and what you think. If you've already started welding, maybe you have a different opinion than me, and that's fine. This was just what I think and a good place to start welding from my experience. And so if you made it this far, I do appreciate it. And go ahead and, like I said, leave a comment. Give me a thumbs up if you liked the video, and consider subscribing if you are not already.